Welcome to One Word, Five Questions with Donna Vitek, that is I, one bad I, and Dr. Mark Holowchak. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Holowchak.
Oh, thank you for having me as usual, and I like the badass Clint Eastwood. I think if you had a long beard like I did, you could be in the ZZ Top band with those glasses.
Oh, I'd love to be in ZZ Top. That would be great.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
Oh, okay. Before we get started, I'd like to give a little bit of background with Dr. Holowchak, his credentials. He is a PhD professor of philosophy and history, who has taught at institutions such as the University of Pittsburgh, University of Michigan, Rutgers University, Camden, and Ohio University. He's the editor of the Journal of Thomas Jefferson and His Time, and he has authored numerous, over 23, I think, published books. Do you have a count?
Plenty. As the Ukrainians would say in broken, whole bunch, plenty books.
Whole bunch, plenty books. And over 200 essays on Thomas Jefferson. His list of books and locations of his published essays can be found in the video description. With our show One Work, Five Questions, I'll ask Dr. Holowchak 5 questions on one work of Thomas Jefferson. And today's work is the letter Thomas Jefferson wrote to John Wayles Epps, dated 24th of June, 1813. Woohoo! And to give you a little bit of an introduction, Thomas Jefferson is customarily charged with deep ignorance of fiscal affairs. This week, we cover Thomas Jefferson's views on banks, federal debt, federal taxes, and paper money. Ooh, what would he think if he were alive today with our national debt? You don't have to answer that. That was just the first question that came to my mind.
We'll answer that throughout the course of this discussion. That's for sure. The listeners will implicitly be able to answer that question.
Oh, okay. So today we're going to examine a lengthy letter from Thomas Jefferson to John Wayles Epps on June 24th, 1813. I'm Donna Vitek, and this is One Word, Five Questions. Oh, and forgive these Darth Vader. I got Darth Vader glasses. I'm still recovering from my eye surgery. So
I think they make you look like a badass.
yeah,
You're as bad as my dog Jefferson here when he went and he attacked a pit bull that came on the property. So
he's crazy. Oh my gosh, I
chased it away, all 12, 13 pounds of him.
Well, I wish I had I wish I were better prepared. I'd play bad to the bone right now.
Okay.
Bad.
You might need it for next.
And we have Bad Doggy joining us on Twitter Spaces. We're recording live on Twitter Spaces. We can't forget that.
You have an introductory video for us today?
Yes, we do. We have an introductory video of the bank run. Okay, hold on. Let me make sure I'm sharing sound. Yes, I am. Okay, here we go.
And it's a wonderful life.
Now, just remember that this thing isn't as black as it appeared. I have some news for you, folks. I was just talking to old man Potter, and he's guaranteed cash payments to the bank. The bank's going to reopen next week.
But, George, I got my money here. Did he guarantee this place?
Well, no, Charlie, I didn't even ask him. We don't need Potter over here.
Then I'll take mine now.
No, but you're thinking of this place all wrong, as if I had the money back in a safe. The money's not here. Well, your money's in Joe's house. That's right next to yours. And in the Kennedy house, and Mrs. Maitland's house, and 100 others. You're lending them the money to build, and then they're going to pay it back to you as best they can. Now, what are you going to do, foreclose on them?
I got $242 in here, and $242 isn't going to break anybody.
Okay, Tom. All right. Here you are. You sign this. You get your money in 60 days.
60 days?
Oh, what do we have to say about that?
Well, in a sense, we're going to find out that's what banks are all about, right? In those sorts of institutions. So, I mean, and Jefferson was not so naive. He was well aware of that. So, cute,
Yes.
cute movie.
Yes, I love them. I just recently watched it for the first time.
Wow, yeah, it's cute. I mean, it's been done before in earlier movies and stuff, but it's the same sort of theme, but it's a cute movie.
Oh,
I thought it'd be a suitable introduction for our discussion today. All right,
yes,
ready to go?
it is. It is, Dr. Holowchak. Okay, question number 1. Who is John Wayles Epps, and what is the purpose of such a lengthy fiscal letter?
Well, the first sentence of the letter to John Wayles Epps, who is his son-in-law, married Mary Jefferson, and what date? I have it somewhere on October 13, 1797.
Okay.
A first cousin, but he says this letter will be on politics only. So Epps would become a Virginian lawyer and a politician. Like I said, he's the son-in-law of Thomas Jefferson. Marries his daughter, his youngest daughter. He is elected to the 13th Congress, where he serves from 1813 to 1815 on March the 4th, to March the 4th, 1813, 1815. This letter is on June 24, 1813. So he's a congressman at the time, right? He's in the House of Representatives, House of Delegates, Representatives. And he would be on a committee, the Ways and Means Committee. So we have here a letter to his son-in-law, who's an important politician at the time in the United States. And it's about economics. It's about fiscal considerations. So, yeah, I mean, just looking at some web pages in preparation for this, we have a $32 trillion debt, federal debt, right? The average person pays something like $14,000 in taxes each year, not just property, but on food and everything else. And one website, a governmental website, says the national debt enables the federal government to pay for important programs and services for the American public.
That is a very liberal thing to say.
Isn't that beautiful? There are so many programs that we are $32 trillion in debt. That's all I'll say about his son-in-law.
Okay. Are we ready for question number 2?
Yes. So we gotta,
okay.
At some point.
Question number 2. Jefferson begins with a cherished precept never to borrow $1 without laying a tax in the same instant for paying the interest annually and the principal within a given term, and to consider that tax as pledged to the creditors on the public faith. Why does he introduce this precept?
It's an illustration of fiscal responsibility. Jefferson, as a politician, was very anal about being perfectly responsible, but not heavily taxing, having no taxes if you don't need to have them, and not heavily burdening the citizens. And it's a matter of his own principles of government. He says, on such a pledge as this, sacredly observed, a government may always command on a reasonable interest all the lendable money of their citizens, while the necessity of an equivalent tax is a salutary warning to them and their constituents against oppressions, bankruptcy, and its inevitable consequence, revolution. So in other words, for Jefferson, as opposed to Alexander Hamilton, the debt, the national debt, the level of taxation, the amount of taxation, these things are signals of the corruption of a government. They're signals of in the sense that heavy taxation means strong government means coercive government and all
right.
things. And this all ties into Jeffersonian principles of government. So in many respects, the conversation we shall be having today concerns two radically different fundamental ways for the government to be run: Hamiltonian, based on England, and Jeffersonian government, which is radically trying to do something, I should say, radically different here. Right? So it's based on being responsible to the citizens, not putting too much burden on the citizens. And we'll get into that as we go on. So that, I think that's enough at least to answer that question
Okay.
suitably, if not exhaustively, but suitably.
Okay. Question number 3. Thomas Jefferson moves on the time for repayment of debts. He writes, what limits it will be asked, does time prescribe to their powers? What is to hinder them from creating a perpetual debt?
Yeah, those are questions that Jefferson asks. This notion of perpetual debt, that's what he's afraid of, right? Perpetual debt is something Hamilton wanted very, very dearly, because that meant that you're going to have the citizens constantly paying taxes and being taxation on imports and things like that, so that the federal government will have money that enables it to run efficiently. And I use efficiently in scarecrow. Jefferson does not think any large government can be an efficient government because it'll represent its own interest, not the interest of people. Now,
and
here we
we
go
see
back
that today.
yes.
I'm sorry, I had to throw that
this discussion is completely, as you're hinting at, relevant today.
That's what I was
right?
looking for in this when I chose this topic, because
it
I
goes back to, we have to go back to Ronald Reagan, who adopted a sort of Jeffersonian policy about fiscal responsibility, with the qualification that Reagan came in with all the Star Wars stuff that cost tons and tons and tons of money. So we were, you know, he wasn't entirely consistent, but those were his inclinations at the time, sort of. But anyways, we get to this notion that, about which we talked, Jefferson's notion of generational sovereignty, that each generation has its own duties and no generation has a right to bind the next generation. And the notion of generational sovereignty, I'll try to give by an example. Imagine my father, who passed a long time ago, takes out an exorbitant loan of, several hundred thousands of dollars. He's allowed to. He has credit enough that allows him to take out such a massive loan. And he has a pledge. Jefferson uses 19 years. Every 19 years, that's the length of a generation on average, following Comte de Buffon, the great naturalist. So imagine my father goes out and lives a high life. He's going out and he's dancing girls, and liquoring it up, and having fun and enjoying himself within the span, even though he's living a dissipative lifestyle, so that by the time at some point he passes away prematurely, and by the time the loan needs to be repaid, he has not gone anyways to repaying it. So what happens? Imagine that the burden of the loan falls upon me. Now, I didn't share in any of the dissipation, and I wasn't privy to it, and I'm not for it. But imagine the question would be: is it fair to me to have to pay off my father's loan? Jefferson answers no. Jefferson is clearly probably influenced by the debt he inherited from his father-in-law, Mr. Wayles, right, who left him a large number of slaves, another capital, but he also left him a debt that took him decades to dig from. So the whole notion is sort of fiscal responsibility. Jefferson says, talking about this notion of perpetual debt, he says the earth belongs to the living, not to the dead. The will and the power of man expire with his life by nature's law, right? So he goes to this period of a generation, and says every 19 years, no one should be allowed to take out a loan or to be, excused, or to have more money than he can be obliged to pay back within the time of his own life, his own generation. Otherwise, it's not fair to the subsequent generation to be burdened.
Right.
Now, that's a political policy as well, so that at the level of the federal government needs to operate every generation, per se, in a fiscally responsible manner. And we know Jefferson was anal about reducing the federal debt that was pretty much gleaned in the Adams administration and in Washington. There were somewhat $75 million of debt, and he, in his administration, went a long ways, even though making the Louisiana Purchase and with the war with the Barbary pirates, they still reduced the debt substantially by at least a third, from 75 million, 52 or so. So the idea is that every 19 years or so, there has to be fiscal responsibility at the federal level, and loans need to be repaid and everything within the term of a generation. I think Jefferson would say that within the 8-year span of a 2-term presidency, there needs to be fiscal responsibility so that we're not spending beyond our means there. So that's the time period he gives, 19 years.
We need some Jeffersonians in our Congress today.
Well, 32 trillion's not much. Come on. Well, that's a big, hot topic today in terms of the ceiling, opposing a ceiling to the debt. So, and having some agreement by the current administration to curb spending. Well, we did talk about, before ending here, we did talk about, what did I talk about? All these wonderful program enables the federal government to pay for important programs and services. Well, important for whom?
Right.
If you,
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's just like in our Constitution when it states general welfare, how far does that go? But anyway, that's another discussion.
No, Jefferson would say, he found out, according to Hamilton, Hamilton's concept, general welfare, and he used that term, meant his own welfare and his buddies' welfare, the people with the money.
Oh.
And that's not far from the truth either.
Oh, okay. Ooh. Okay, question number 4. You note in several books that Thomas Jefferson has been roasted over his avowed naive concerns concerning fiscal matters. I'm sorry. Was he really so naive?
Roasted, huh? Makes me want to have some roasted chicken.
Roasted nuts.
Anything. Yeah, all scholars pretty much inclined to Jefferson being, because Jefferson said when he came back from France that, I got involved in these fiscal matters with Hamilton and other people, and he did, he's not abreast of these things. And we take Jefferson as word. I think he's being honest, but Jefferson was not as naive as people make him out to be. And for him, the issue was different governments because he advocated a different way of life. Hamilton was thinking about the sort of businesses, corporations, and industries in the North, in the industrial North, and Jefferson's thinking about the agricultural South. And the agricultural South was a model for him for all of America, not just for the South. So Hamilton was an advocate of thick government with a strong executive, with a willowy interpretation of the Constitution, of paper money, right, which could readily be circulated more efficiently, of a national bank was critical. Jefferson opposed that. Jefferson did not, in principle, oppose the banks, but he thought they should be at the state level and conducted by local affairs of the state, not the nation. And talk about that in a little bit, what national debt in a Bank of the United States meant. You have a picture there of Alexander Hamilton, who fought the Bank of the United States and closed it during his administration. He was a staunch Jeffersonian with some reservations, even though Jefferson detested Jackson, but Jackson took himself to be a practicing Jeffersonian. So Hamilton believed in strong manufactured tariff to protect American goods. And Jefferson, in contrast to thick government, believed in thin government, a president who was obedient to the strictures of the Constitution, to agrarianism, to an agricultural lifestyle, to a level of manufacture that would complement the sort of agricultural goods that America was producing and presumably exporting to the needy nations of the world that needed their American agricultural goods. Jefferson is very quiet today, aren't you, Jeff? So Jefferson was very much against Hamilton fiscal system. I read, he says, I consider this from his annex, I believe he says, I consider it as two things, two components. It's a puzzle to exclude popular understanding and inquiry. It is a machine for corruption of the legislature. Now, they were, in some sense, he thought it was very confusing, and it was meant to be confusing because it was a cover for corrupt governmental practices, government in partnership with business. And we're going to see that's what Hamilton was ultimately advocating, right? He says, I say, Hamilton thought humans could be governed by either force or interest. And, you know, he fell back saying force and interest. He thought it was just too obviously wrong to have a government by force. So we're going to make it within the interest of people to participate in the federal government. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So where Hamilton believed in a strong executive, a thick government, a large federal debt would glue the states, and I'll explain why with the next question, would glue the states to the federal government, right? And the idea is to make the federal government the large agency, not the states' governments being predominant. And that was the idea behind the whole republic in the first place, is that the states would be the primary political institution. Hamilton, no, we're going to turn that on its head. So he writes, Jefferson writes to Washington, I have a quote. He says, no man is more ardently intent to see the public debt soon and sacredly paid off than I am. This exactly marks the difference between Colonel Hamilton's views and mine, that I wish the debt paid tomorrow. He wishes it never to be paid, but always to be a thing wherein to corrupt and manage the legislature. I end with another quote here I take about Jefferson's views on usury. Usury being the practice of making money, on the handling of money. The idea Jefferson, and this is part of Jefferson's love of farming, is because when I barter or pay a farmer for certain goods, I need those goods. I need his corn, his rye, his wheat, his beets, his whatever, his onions, whatever he's growing. Whereas usury or having banks is a matter of an institution making money on money. Banks today take in money, right? And they are obliged by federal law to keep, out of all the money they take in that is stored at the banks, they're obliged to keep 10% of that money in the bank, which means out of all the money thrown into the bank, they can loan out at large rates, 90% of it, thereby make money that way. It's an idea, it certainly makes sense. Jefferson didn't like the idea of making money on money. What you're providing, we would say, Hamilton and others say, you're providing a useful service, you're providing loans so businesses get started. Jefferson say, well, what businesses are more important than farming, right? And we don't need such institutions. Or if we're going to have these institutions saving and loaning money, let them be at the state level, not at the national level. So he says this to Poumard de Rieux in 1792, January 6th, and I'll end with this for this question. The rage of gambling in the stocks of various descriptions is such, and the profits sometimes made and therefore always hoped in that line are so far beyond any interest which an individual can give, that all their money and credit is centered in their own views. The bank has just now notified its proprietors that they may call for a dividend of 10% on their capital for the last 6 months. This makes a profit of 26% annum. Agriculture, commerce, and everything useful must be neglected when this useless employment of money is so much more lucrative. You have a, printing out money, you have a picture of paper money being shot out, right?
Yes.
We have today a paper money standard that was practiced back then, but it was based on gold. Right. And it was long the practice that you can exchange the paper money for its amount in gold, whatever that was. So there was a sort of pledge there. Now we've come to a system where the distribution of gold over the country is so uneven. We've abandoned the gold system and adopted a system that's based on credit, right? So the value of the American dollar as compared to the British pound, whatever, is all based on sort of, I don't want to call it arbitrariness, but there's nothing concrete to back it. It's all based on past behavior and belief that you're going to be, fiscally responsible in the future. So we have a debt of 32 trillion. And like you said, how can we justify being so massively in debt? I told you before, it's sort of like an individual having a credit card and being massively in debt on the credit card, and each year, each month going more and more in debt on the credit card, but still being allowed to make purchases. When imagine I'm $3 million in debt on my card, but yet, they don't close things off. They say, well, you can still keep making purchases.
Right.
And at some point, it defies sort of credibility when you think of how this system works, not based on anything, but the idea is 32 trillion in debt. Well, what happened if we had to pay that off at one time? Well, the country obviously would fall apart, but in global economics, if the United States economy falls to pieces, so does China, so does England,
Right.
and so forth. And that's the whole thing. It's, in effect, from what I gather, and I'm no economist, it's a house of cards, right?
Right.
Smoke and mirrors.
Yeah. So, I think I'm inspired to buy some Doge, some cryptocurrency in honor of Thomas Jefferson.
There you go. Well, I don't know much about the cryptocurrency, but I think you could probably answer what Jefferson would say about it from everything I just talked about. He wasn't excited about paper money.
Right.
He understood, I think, at some point it was needed, but what is a piece of paper? Paper has no worth.
Right.
It's just like an IOU. It's no different.
Right.
Except it has federal backing. If it's a federal note, it's like the government giving you an IOU. But we're only 32 trillion in debt. Sure, we'll pay you back.
Mm-hmm. I don't see how the future generations are going to do it, but that's another conversation. We'll move on to question number 5.
We'll
You
just
say
borrow more money to pay
No.
off what we owe, or the interest
Yes.
on what we owe. And
You
hope
say
no
in several
one-
writings, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. You say in several writings that Thomas Jefferson, after returning from France, was soured by an incident with Hamilton. Ooh, can you explain?
Yeah, and this is the one about which I spoke earlier when, something happened when Jefferson comes back from France, and Hamilton is trying to figure out how to implement, the notion of a Bank of the United States and federal debt, all sorts of things to get his British-styled economic program instantiated in the United States. So now, because of the Revolutionary War, there's substantial debt. There's something like $75 million that was in debt. And at the time, I think some of it's been paid back. If I recall correctly, the debt, there's still a debt of some $21 billion, which at the time was extraordinary, that was not paid. Now, the government owned nations like France, Spain, the Netherlands, some $10 million. And like I said, there's a $21 million debt. So Hamilton's plan was this. The money that was owed, part of the money that was paid for the war was by individual American investors. So, these people bought, bonds or something, hoped to be repaid back if the war was won and stuff like that. Again, it's a pledge. So Hamilton's plan was this. We want to assume the debts of the states. The states were obliged to pay certain amounts of money to sustain the war. The southern states, pretty much Virginia, completely paid off what they owed. Many of the northern states did not, but many of the southern states either paid off or paid off a large part of what they owed for that debt. So he says, let's assume the debts of the states, all the states, right? So right off the bat, it's not a fair plan because the northern states principally are the ones that own the large part of the money.
Right.
So assumption of debt's not going to benefit the South very much, is it?
No.
Okay, that's one thing. So we eliminate all states' debts, and the secondary result is that we unify the individual states by having this federal debt. There's going to be this kindness that the fatherly and loving federal government pays off the states' debts, and states are all going to be happy, even though the Southerners don't owe much. So it's going to benefit. So everybody's going to be happy. That's not true. So we pay off the remaining debts. We issue bonds, and we give purchasers a stake by issuing bonds and pay off the people who are owed. And we issue bonds for other people to invest in the government. Those bonds will be paid off in tariffs, in taxes on the individual citizens. So right off the bat, the people who are owed money are paid a fraction of what they had been paid, right? If federal government owes me 100, well, I'll give you $10 and keep quiet. So, and then the other people come in, the wealthy Northerners like Hamilton come in and buy bonds into the federal government. That links the wealthy Northerners to the new federal government. So the success of the government, if I'm investing in the government, I want it to succeed. And likewise, the government wants the individuals to succeed. So you have partnership with wealth. And Jefferson obviously would find that abhorrent, right? So, like I said, that was Hamilton's plan. It no wise literally benefited the Southerners, and all the benefits, or most of them, would be to the Northerners. And the plan was, okay, if you allow assumption in federal debt, we'll allow the capital, right, not to be in Philadelphia, New York, or Annapolis, but to be where it is right now, Washington, D.C. So Jefferson really didn't think through this all the way. He came to regret this concession, but he didn't have, and Madison say, yeah, let's do that, right? So Jefferson says, I quote from him, as the pill would be a bitter one to the southern states, something should be done to soothe them, that the removal of the seat of government to the Potomac was a just measure and would probably be a popular one with them and would be a proper one to follow the assumption. So it sounds good because, okay, yeah, okay, this plan is going to benefit mostly the Northerners, but the capital is going to be close to the southern states. Or at least, was entirely in the northern areas. At least it's going to be a place that is a compromise position between the North and South, where it is off the Potomac. So Jefferson says, of the measure later, says it was unjust in itself, oppressive to the states, and was acquiesced in merely from fear of discussion. While our government was still in its most infant state, it enabled Hamilton so to strengthen himself by corrupt services to many, that he could afterwards carry his bank scheme and every measure, right, he proposed in defiance of all opposition. In fact, it was a principal ground where it was reared up, that speculating phalanx in and out of Congress, which has since been able to give laws to change the political complexion of the government of the U.S. In other words, we make this compromise, and in effect, the economic scheme of the United States is essentially that of Great Britain, right? Where we have a strong executive who functions a lot like a king. We have a heavy debt, right? With the strong debt, strong executive and heavy debt, we have a strong federal government. So we are in the position where the federal government starts to predominate over the needs of the state's government. That is not Jeffersonian in the least, right?
I know.
I mean, does that make sense? So the South was not going to gain at all from this, not much at least. And Hamilton is involved in a scheme for buying bonds, buying into the new federal government. Hamilton certainly gets involved in this, right?
Gosh, could any of this led to the war we had in 1861?
Well, of course. I mean, that's what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah.
everybody says the war is about slavery. Here we get an early example how the North and the industrialized North was so radically different from the South. There are all sorts of taxes on Southern goods to the extent that the Northern states really were feeding off of Southern taxes for the goods that were produced. Economic considerations, it's a very good question. My palaverous one. It is my loquacious one, my wordy one, my blab blabber. I'm teasing you.
Yeah, I'm
You always
the blab
call me the
blabber.
blab blabber. But anyways.
Okay, in the comments, who is the blab blabber, please? If you're watching this, please in the comments. Is it he?
I have to expatiate, to explicate the whole scene here for our viewing audience.
Well, I would like to explicate for next episode. We have
what is explicate? What is Pisces? Pisces is Latin for what? What is the horoscope? Pisces, the what?
Fish.
Yes. So pisces is Latin for fish. To X is out. So explicate just means to fish out. It's not such a fishy term anymore, is it?
We're going to
fish out.
We're going to fish out the anomaly for next week, which is something radically different. And we will stay in the year 1813. Can you tell us about it quickly? Because we only have 2 minutes left, and I want to be able to tell people how to reach.
Plenty of time for a palaverous person such as myself. Anyways, we're going to do a letter, Jefferson, August 6, 1813, to John Waldo. And let me tell you that I am my confabulatory one, my talky, my prolix one. I am my waffling one. I'm very excited about this one because we're going to do language. Finally going to do Jefferson talking about how to set limits to how words can be constructed in the English language. Is there anything, I ask our viewing, sexier than talking about logotherapy, in a sense, the therapy about dealing with words, the logoi in Greek, talking about words, language. We're going to go into Greek, we're going into Latin, French, and English.
Wow.
Isn't that sexy?
Wow. Oh, this is going to be very interesting. I can't wait. Every week it gets more and more interesting.
Well, to me, this is very interesting. I hope viewers will find it. But sort of person Jefferson was. He got his fingers dirty with details. And we're going to see that.
A lot of details.
Yes.
I know I was joking before we started the show. I wonder how many people would get his letters and say, oh, wow, I feel overwhelmed with the length of them. But so if you'd like to contact Dr. Holowchak to speak for 4th of July is coming up. If you'd like for him to do a presentation on Thomas Jefferson for the 4th of July, you can reach him at mholowchak@hotmail.com. You can reach him on Twitter at Dr. Holowchak, and his Facebook page, Thomas Jefferson, Bring Him Home to Monticello, Citizens for Change. If he's available for book signings.
Or just come to your keg party to be
or just come to your keg
drinker.
party. Yeah, only if you have what kind of beer?